All right, Sofa King Cool here with Todd Rundgren. How you doing, man?
Um, okay.
Congratulations on your 27th album, White Knight.
Oh, thank you very much.
Now, there's a lot of collabs on this album. How did you hook up with all the artists on this?
It was pretty simple. I made up a list of people I thought would work, and then got somebody to start calling them. And actually, I had a longer list than wound up in the final product. Um, so the record essentially reflects whatever got delivered, not necessarily what could have been on there. But I've actually continued to sort of do this collaborative thing. It's working out pretty well and provided some interesting interactions. So White Knight is kind of like the start of a whole phase for me now.
Now, I understand there's going to be a re-release with some extra songs.
Yes, there will be. I guess they call it a deluxe edition or something like that. So right now I'm putting together those other collaborations. And I hope to get that done before the end of the year, so it'll be out early next year.
Awesome. Who else can we hear on the deluxe edition?
Well, as I mentioned, sometimes you have somebody who agrees to collaborate, but for whatever reason, it doesn't get done in time to be included in the project. So I kind of hesitate to mention anything until it's actually done.
Huh?
And we're only just starting this part of the process now. But as soon as something's done, we'll make sure that everybody knows about it.
Great, great. Now, you are keeping busy. I understand you just finished your autobiography.
I've delivered a first draft. Now there's a spelling corrections and such, and minor tweaks here and there. So I haven't yet to be informed of an actual release date, but yeah, I've technically delivered it.
Awesome. What kind of stories can we expect to hear in this?
Well, it's, other stuff like my productions have been covered in other books, and it's not necessary, I don't think, for me to rehash that. So it's more about stuff that people wouldn't really know about. My travels around the world, especially in like the Middle East and India and stuff like that, which was never directly the subject of anything that I've talked about before. The experience, of course, plays into the music, but for the most part, I haven't talked much about the experience. So it's going to be more or less what happened to me for the first 50 years. I got the culmination of it is my 50th birthday, and in point of fact, after that, it's kind of a different story, and not as much has happened since my 50th birthday. Mostly going to watch my kids play baseball and stuff, and the kind of things that parents do. And so that'll be a different story if I ever get around to that.
Right, right. Now, are you going to release some intimate details about your life in this autobiography? Things like the relationship that you have with Liv Tyler, things like that?
Yeah, all of that's in there. That's probably what people are expecting to read about, the issues surrounding that, but it's not the only thing. I've written it in a kind of interesting way as well. I've written it like I would like to read it. And so instead of being the normal sort of, chapters of however many pages, each chapter is just one page. So you could open the book anywhere and read a page and get more or less the entire story without having to depend on something else.
Awesome.
And that's how I'd like to do it. I wouldn't like to have to read an entire chapter of setup just to get to the punchline.
Well, you almost have to do a different approach like that these days. I mean, people have such short attention spans. I mean, with a phone constantly in their hand doing something on social media or YouTube or something like that, you know?
Yeah, well, that's what books on tape is for. Yeah.
Now, have you ever ran into Steven Tyler after the fact? I mean, do you guys ever have a conversation, or you still talk?
Oh yeah, we've run into each other. As a matter of fact, when Liv had a party when she first got married, like years ago, and Stephen and I were both there, and so there was no sort of direct issues there. I've run into Stephen here and there afterwards. I ran into him like within the past year, I think, out at the Sunset Marquee in Los Angeles or something, just by accident. It's kind of unusual or ironic, I guess you would say, that the crew that we use here on the Ringo Starr's All-Star show, which I'm currently wrapping up, is actually the same pool of people who do Aerosmith and Bruce Springsteen. So we get stories all the time about what's happening with Aerosmith and what's happening with Bruce Springsteen, you know, slightly inside tales and stuff like that. So it's curious that that after all this time, there's actually a kind of a 2 degrees of separation between me and Steven Tyler.
Now, you just mentioned you're on the road with Ringo Starr and the All-Star Band. This is actually the longest time that this actual group has been together. Is that right?
This is the 6th year, yeah, of this particular lineup.
That's actually
Ringo doesn't.
When the Beatles have been together.
Yeah, we're going to be lapping the Beatles pretty soon, and it's. I think it's the band that Ringo sort of always wanted, but the All-Star thing was a way of experimenting, I suppose. He usually breaks the band up after a tour or two. Sometimes he hangs on to a couple of the members. But I think this was the first time that he got a combination of guys that are seasoned enough that they and have strong enough egos, you know, that there aren't really any social issues in the band, and we're all experienced enough players who we can, you know, contribute to each other's performances in a way that, you know, a lot of the other bands didn't happen. Because Ringo's only criteria to be an all-star was that you had 3 hit records at some point. But beyond that, you know, there was no psychological evaluation or anything like that. And every once in a while, you'll get somebody that, yeah, you haven't heard of them for years and years. And you know why? because they're crazy. That's why. So he gets them out to do their 3 songs, but, you know, sometimes there's, you know, grudge matches, and just as often there are musicians who can play their own 3 songs, but they can't play anybody else's song.
Right, yeah. There's definitely got to be a lot of complications when you throw something like that together. I'm glad that.
It's you know, you would think that after, I don't know how many bands he did like 15, maybe more different variations of the band. You know, that there would have been some sort of, you know, other criteria besides just the 3 hits, you know, but yeah, right. That was pretty much always the way it is. But I think in the, you know, right before this particular lineup came together, he was starting to find players he wanted to hang on to, like Richard Page and Steve Lukather and Greg Bissonette, because they have tales of tours previous to me joining this, which means they've been playing with Ringo for maybe 10 years straight now.
Now, after this tour wraps up, you're jumping right into the White Nights tour?
Yeah, we only got about halfway across the country when we went out in the spring, and then we joined up with Yes and the Estival and hit several other territories, and it worked out pretty well for us. We were kind of the act in the middle, so we had the advantage of the audience already being in their seats, and also not being not being in a hurry to get to the parking lots to beat the traffic leaving. So, we were sort of lucky we got the audience's full attention.
Right, right.
But we did have to shorten the show. We had to take the video out, which is a not insignificant aspect of the show. And because of how bulky the original show was, we're doing a few modifications so we can get into a greater variety of venues. So it'll be a little bit different than the one we did in the spring, but substantially the same set.
Now, I understand when the Lemon Twigs brought you out for Coachella.
Yeah.
And you're actually going to be near them when they're recording their new album, and there's talks that you're going to stop by the studio?
Yeah, we're going to spend a day in the studio, see what happens. They haven't sent me anything yet of what they're working on, and I'm not even sure that they're off the road yet working on it. They are like slaves out there. They have been on the road for like forever, and only have like 2-week-long breaks every now and then for them to work on a new recording. So I think they're probably going to finally settle down and carve out a chunk and get their sophomore record done. But I'm very interested to hear what they come up with. They're an unusual group. The oldest guy is 20, and his brother's 18. And they don't write together. They both write differently, and they both have different influences, so it's real interesting the way they present themselves. I don't know if you've ever seen them live, but they'll start out, one of the brothers will be up front, and one of the brothers will be on the drums. And then halfway through the show, they switch. And when the other guy on the drums comes up front, and the guy up front goes and back and plays the drums. And they're both great players at everything. So it's just a real interesting show to watch. How they translate that onto record is their challenge.
Now, it's going to be an interesting time for you. I mean, for someone that young, for you to be able to go in the studio and show them a couple of things. I mean, you've had such a wondrous career. I mean, you've done so many different things. I mean, from recording your own to producing, you did bat out of hell.
Well, it's a funny era in some ways. You don't think so much about these younger bands because a lot of what they do is festivals and things like that, and you may not see them so much in the typical venues like Saturday Night Live or something like that. Maybe they will get their break at some point, but I've been doing collaborations with younger bands for like several years now. I think the first instance was a remix I did for Tame Impala of their first hit record, Elephant. And they were like a very young band out of Australia, and they represent this phenomenon where they're tired of the contemporary music that they're hearing, and so they go back like years and decades looking for influences, to bands and acts that were big before they were even born. And so a band like Tame Impala is imitating like Pink Floyd from the 60s, and the Lemon Twigs are imitating like Queen and the Beatles and that sort of stuff. So it's really interesting if you're still active, somebody from my era, I guess, and you're still active, you have a pretty good chance of running into one of these bands who's heard your music because they're doing that sort of research. They're going back and listening to music from before they were even born.
Now, that's an interesting fact that you're bringing up. You're stating that all these bands are starting to sound almost like classic rock bands. I mean, one of the biggest hits of the year was the Greta Van Fleet, and they sound almost identical to Led Zeppelin.
Well, there is that, there's that aspect of it. The problem has been that music has become, ironically enough, with the collapse of the old traditional record thing, music has become actually more corporatized, more dependent on formula, and also, as I say, much more dependent on this kind of internationalization of music that festivals represent. And so a lot of what you hear out of contemporary bands is like the choruses have no words to them. Everything's like whoa, 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 and la, 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 and that kind of thing, so that you can internationalize the music, so you can play a festival in Germany and everybody can sing along because it's not in any language, you know. It's just a bunch of sing-along syllables and stuff like that, and that's kind of what's happened to music, and I think some bands have just gotten tired of it. You know, they don't want to have to do that kind of formulaic, self-conscious music. They want to do something that's fun and maybe a little bit off the beaten track and counter to what there is already so much of.
You know, I do find that interesting. I mean, I hear some of these bands, and you're spot on with the fact that they're not using any words in their songs, and I can't see any of these bands having the staying power to have 40 years down the line, someone's going to go see them still, or, you know, I mean, you're not going to see anybody from this era almost.
Well, it's, you know, that's always the acid test. Go back, let's say, of the bands that are still relevant today. You know, how many of them existed 20 years ago? You know, we had that whole what they called grunge or garage band movement, which is sort of a regular thing that happens. Music gets too prissy and formulaic, and so something that's much more simple and accessible and sort of breaks everything back down to the original ethos, you know, will start to come out. And this may be, you know, an aspect of it, although it usually takes a representation of something very simple. It was like the music of the 80s that became very synthesizer oriented and very kind of particularly arranged, and, you know, electronic drums and all that other stuff, and then boom, Nirvana. It comes out of nowhere. You know, it smells like Teen Spirit, and then all anybody wants to do is play loud guitars again. So we may be on a cusp of a movement like that. The most encouraging sign is that female singers who have dominated popular music for the last couple of decades are now starting to fail to deliver. So I guess everybody's getting tired of that kind of music, and maybe that opens a window for something else that's a little bit more authentic.
Now, is it hard for someone who's been in the business for so long to adapt to new music styles? I mean,
it depends on how you see yourself. You know, some people see themselves as stylists in a way, and so you kind of work in a little corner of the garden, of the musical garden all the time, and you just perfect what goes on there. But if you were sort of born with musical curiosity, all of this is, you know, infinitely interesting. There's nothing that requires you to listen to Taylor Swift. So if you work that out of your, you know, routine, if you never, you know, like I couldn't hum to you a Taylor Swift song at all.
right.
Even though she's like the most, you know, the highest selling entertainer in the world. I could not, you know, sing to you a chorus from a Taylor Swift song. So there's nothing that requires you to, you know, to listen to that music. We live in a kind of a golden age where everything is equally accessible through online music services. So if you only want to listen to a certain kind of music, you're free to do that. But also, if you want to go out and find new styles of music that are completely unfamiliar to you, there is nothing preventing you from that. It used to be, if you wanted to go out and explore new music styles, you had to pay for it. You know, you had to make the commitment to buy somebody's strange album and then discovered that you did or didn't like it. Now you've got YouTube and Spotify and services like Napster that you pay a kind of a user fee for, and you can listen to all the music you want. And that it opens the door to exploring other styles of music that you might not otherwise have discovered.
Now, speaking of exploring other kinds of musical styles, I understand that you're actually doing a Broadway musical, is that right?
Well, we are in the throes of trying to get the project started. The one advantage you might say we have is that there's already plenty of music to utilize. That was kind of why the people involved thought it would be a good idea. But the hardest thing is coming up with a story that has, that hasn't been already told over and over again. That's got some interesting new twist to it. And once you get that, then that's the beginning of a very long process of getting funded, of scheduling the people that you want to get involved. Broadway shows are so expensive because they so often flop. They can be spectacular successes or spectacular failures. They're kind of like films in a way. And first you have to get the story that everyone agrees is going to bring people into the theater. Then you have to find the people that you want involved in the project, like, let's say, the director that you want and the marquee star that you want, any of which may be working on different projects at the time, so you got to wait for them to get free. And while you're waiting for them to get free, you're trying to get like $5 million, for the pre-production of the thing. So Broadway hits are really hard to come by and very expensive and kind of a gamble. So if we get the story, and we're hoping to do that very soon, that'll be the beginning of what may be a 5-year process.
Well, it's definitely going to be very interesting. I mean, you have, like I said, such a wondrous career. I mean, I even remember there was a time where you decided that you didn't want to take instruments on the road with you anymore and did that a cappella album.
Well, that was kind of I keep a list of weird ideas in my head, and then sometimes there's a point at which it seems like a good idea to pull one of them out and try it. And I had, when I was in high school, I sang in the choir. Actually, it was in junior high school, and I learned a lot about singing. And the process of doing that, and always wanted to do something that was principally focused around vocals as opposed to instruments. And I think it was the sampler that I got, my emulator, that enabled me to think seriously about the project. And it allowed me to do sort of like a primitive variation of beatboxing, where you make noises into a microphone and sample them, and they take the place of drums and that sort of thing. But it wasn't the last weird idea I had, and who knows, there are other ones in there that I may pull out. Like, at one point I thought I wanted to write an album for marching band. That would be just like a giant college marching band. So I may get to that someday.
That'd be an interesting live show.
Certainly would be. I've done shows with orchestras, and those are always really thrilling, but there's a certain burlesque to a marching band, that a whole other level of show business that I think would make it really interesting.
Now, you kind of find it ironic that you did this album in 1985, I believe, and years later you got shows like Glee, and you got I don't know what those movies are called. There's like 3 sequels to it where it's about a cappella singing. I mean, they're hit movies.
Oh, yeah. I don't think I've seen the films, but it's a kind of underground music. There are societies who maintain a cappella groups and stuff for decades. It becomes a tradition, and I've often been called to judge a cappella contests where people from all over the country will compete to see who can deliver the most kind of not just tuneful but sort of original ways of using voices. You may or may not have heard the Simpsons done all a cappella, or the Jetsons theme done all a cappella, in which people make all the kind of like spaceship noises and things that go along with it, stuff like that. So there's a lot of interesting things, once you step out of this, typical sort of barbershop quartet way of approaching it. And I've, been quite chuffed every once in a while to be put in a position of having to judge someone's version of one of my a cappella songs from that record. And that's always interesting.
Yeah, definitely is. Well, I thank you for your time. People want to follow up with you. They want to know more.
Yeah, I got another.
What's that?
I got another one coming up any second now, so I got to move anyway.
People want to follow up. They want to know more about the tour. They want to know about the autobiography, things like that. Where's the best place to get everything Todd Rundgren?
Well, the most information can usually be found at the TR Connection, trconnection.com. That's actually kind of fan-managed, and they have a wealth of detail about what's going on now, what has gone on, archives of reviews and photos and all that other stuff. So they do a much better job than I would do.
All right. Thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.